Instructions. Each team has 20 minutes to present its case to the judges. I will show a board for the 10, 5, last 10 minutes, and last 30 seconds of the presentation. During the last 10 seconds of the speech, I will indicate by the means of my two hands the number of remaining seconds. A team not having ended its presentation after 20 minutes will be stopped to move on to the period of questions. A period of questions of a maximum duration of 5 minutes is assigned to the jury at the end of the presentation. I would like to remind the jury that it is mandatory to ask at least one question during this period. I will invite the judges to introduce themselves, and then the team can begin.
Hi, my name is David Cloutier. I'm a regional director at Investors Group in Quebec City.
Hello, my name is Nicholas Shields. I'm also a regional director of Investors Group in Montreal.
Bernard Rosel, regional director for Investors Group at Montreal.
Please go ahead.
We'll just be using the mouse to change slides. Is that cool?
There's also the clicker.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
Monsieur Lebranche, Monsieur Marco Lebranche, you have a great product on your hands. A highly specialized product, one of which you've been reaping the benefits from by providing Quebecers with the products they need to be able to service their pets. Now, going into the future, it is clear that expansion is imminent, and that time for expansion is now. Good evening, Monsieur Lebrun, Monsieur Lebrun. My name is Ravi Kazi, and along with my esteemed group of analysts consisting of myself, Scott Biersdorfer, as well as Margaret, are here to provide you with the solution to how the expansion into the US markets will help Beeks and the company inevitably spread its wings and soar into the near future. So, going over our agenda for today, we'll be talking on to four main things. First, our overview, a mandate as to what you expect from us. Secondly, an analysis, both internal as well as external, items that really helped with our decision to whether we should expand or not. Thirdly, evaluation as to whether we see the expansion being profitable or not. And lastly, we will wrap all our concepts together into a final recommendation. So, going over the project objective itself, you wish to expand your operations into US markets. And to do this, there are two main things that need to happen in order to change right away. Number one, you need to automate your production line. And number two, you need to modernize your facilities. So with this in mind, there are three main decision criteria that we've taken into account. Number one, that being the feasibility of the project. Now, being a small, medium-sized enterprise like yourself, we took that into account to see whether a large expansion project like this is feasible. Number two, the profitability of the expansion. Is there a market there in the US? And whether or not is aligned with our objectives. And lastly, our risk mitigation. You've expressed your concern about mitigating your risk that your son will undertake going into the future. So, going into our investment mandate, we're here to help you come up with a solution to whether or not you should expand in the United States or not. And to help you paint a picture of our presentation for today, we right off the bat recommend that you should undergo the expansion into the United States. So, just to paint a picture of a company overview, there are three main stories I want to harken on. Number one, it being its infrastructure. Currently, you are in possession of old and outdated machinery, and to be able to ramp up production in the United States, that all needs to be replaced and automized. Secondly, there's a lack of advertising within the company. The company currently does not have its own website, and so it's very reliant on its word-of-mouth usage. Now, if we want to expand in the United States, that needs to change as well. So going over to the financial story of sides and how we need to see that change into the future, we see that the company is currently working with revenues of around $700,000. Now, that being of a small, medium enterprise like yourself, that is congruent, but we want to see this grow, and that's why the expansion is very, very necessary. And we also want to see the expansion of revenue growth move past the 10% percentile. And we do feel as though this is feasible, and we'll get into our analysis and our financials and justify that. The last story we really want to harken on is its market share. Currently, the company operates into 6% of Quebec's total market share, and is focused on mostly pet stores as well as breeders. Now, we see concerns in this market share as we've seen a lot of entrants in this market from big retailers, and that being a more leisurely product for our consumers, we do see that as a concern, and we've placed that in our analysis as well. So going over to a little bit of an industry analysis, specifically in the United States, there are three main things that we've looked into. First being its production environment. Canada being the largest producer of grains really puts us in an environment where we have competitive pricing. And so we have a lot more of an ease of cost of raw materials as well as an ease of export in the supply in the short term. So going into our regulatory environment, with Quebec as well as Canada being within the North American Free Trade Agreement, we have abolished the needs for tariffs in that area. And another thing we really want to focus on is a lot of the complementary regulations we see within the labeling as well as the quality control fields, and this really eases a lot of the costs in that method as well. And lastly, one of the more important environments that we want to harken on is the competitive pricing environment. As you know, currently we're in a very depressed CAD situation with our Canadian dollar, and we feel as though this competitive pricing places us in a position where we can grow, and we feel as though that growth potential is immediately available now.
And harking on the new project, a basic thing to look at is the risk analysis. We managed to divide up the risk into three major segments: operational risk, financial risk, and human resources. And then we furthermore separate this into two important segments, both internal risk and external risk. Internal risks are risks that are easily mitigated by the company and intrinsic to their operation strategy. External risks are risks that are not easily mitigated by their company and are more on external factors that are out of the control. Looking at operational internal risk, this is extremely high. This is due to the fact that the company is expanding rapidly, and if it were to undertake this expansion and it's not fruitful, there could be huge costs in terms of manufacturing to both the United States and its domestic consumers. This is due to the fact that the production capability now is almost about to double in size, so meaning that if this company were to take on orders based on that production capability that are not fruitful, it could lead to a much more depressed earnings in the future. The financial risk also is extremely high. Although the $100,000 does not seem like a big sum, it is quite a remarkable quite a remarkable part of the shareholders' equity in this company. If the company were unable to satisfy our NPV value of 10%, it will find a much higher financial risk than the current structure. The human resources risk is medium. Now this is due to the fact that because the company is a small company. There are only 2 employees that are not members of the family, and although the expansion for infrastructure calls for more employees, this risk mitigation strategy the risk is easily mitigated. Then external operational risk is medium. We say this due to the competitors in the market. The competitors are able to expand also rapidly and fulfill this whole. The financial external risk, however, is extremely low. There's no amount of debt on the book. There doesn't seem to be any huge financial leverages that will prevent this company from growing to its fruitful size. And finally, the external human resources risk is also extremely low. So in order to paint a more general picture, we're going to talk about the production capacity analysis. The current facility is able to produce about 440 bags per week. The new facility is going to be producing about 916 bags per week. The reason for this expansion is due to the fact to not only just fulfill orders going into the United States and build that market share, it's also in a way to make sure that the market does not encroach on the production facility. Because currently, the company is selling about 410 bags per week. And with the stipulation of a 10% growth in revenue, this would mean that they would need, in about 5 years, to produce about 470 bags a week. So we see the new facility overall will have an overall 200% increase in production capacity. And then we come to the core financials, which is our break-even analysis. With a variable cost of $13.60 and a transportation cost of $19,000 per year. Just to know, in order to find the optimal break-even point, we tried to calculate the transportation cost by using the least amount of transportation outside the United States. We found that if we're able to max out the production capabilities while also accounting for the sales in the region, there will be about 19 trips made to the United States. And at $1,000 per trip, this would cost about $19,048. This means that the break-even price comes to an even $14.40. Just a few assumptions we're making in order to go into our core financial analysis. We assume that additional employee is needed for the operation. We put in this cost in the fixed cost changing in the company. We also assume that indirect export methods are utilized. What this means is that the company is not going to be selling directly to US consumers, we'll be selling to US consumers through a third-party subsidiary. This is a way not to just mitigate risks, it's also a way to ensure that they're able to have a consumer base ready for them. The third assumption we made is that transportation costs are $1,000 per trip. A fourth assumption we made is that the maximum production capabilities of this new plant is about 916 bags per year. And finally, we found an NPV rate of return on 10%. This was based on the fact that this is a private company, so undertaking the NPV rate of return will have to be much higher than the current market rate because of the risk undertaken.
So we decided to look 5 years into the future and make a financial forecast. There are two factors that go into determining what revenue will be. That is the number of units that are sold and also the price. At your company, you are looking at doing a market penetration strategy. That means you have to undercut the competition. It's not simply good enough to continue providing your product at the same price of approximately $31. We're going to have to take a step below that. And that's an analysis that we have to determine ourselves. By looking at 3 different stages, a bear case, a base case, and a bull case, what we think is not going to go so well, if the case were optimum that we believe is the most likely, and then also if there was a case where everything worked as planned and we actually achieved greater than expectations. So the 2 greatest things we have to focus on is what we're going to be selling our units for and also how many of them. So for our projection in year 1, we started with 2,600 bags being sold. And we increased this at 1% per year for the next 5 years, as you told us you expected to increase your revenue in the future. Also, the price per bag. Currently it's at $31. We brought this all the way down to $21, which is quite low. However, over the next 5 years, we expect the price to increase with inflation at 2% per year. This gives us our revenue forecast for the next 5 years going into the future. The next element is the variable costs. The variable costs we use are what the current variable costs are to produce your unit, which doesn't change throughout this period. When we look at fixed costs, however, we don't include them in this computation because we want to see what is the extra benefit that we are gaining from doing this exportation. Those fixed costs that you currently have to put in are already sunk and will have to be spent no matter what, even if we don't go ahead with this project. However, we are taking on an additional employee. So we have factored in a $30,000 cost for this per year. The last element is transportation, and that we use a formula. And Margaret touched on it a little bit briefly, but that's $1,000 for each trip that a truck has to go. So we want to maximize the amount of product we can put in our trucks before we send them away. And so we determine when the truck will be full and how many trips it will have to make in a year. We then multiply the number of trips in a year by the $1,000 cost to give us the transportation cost per year. Now initially, the bags being sold are 2,600 and the initial price per bag is $21. Those are 2 numbers that I want you to really pay attention to. Currently, the local bags being sold are 21,320. So as you can see, this is quite significantly lower than what you're currently selling. Now, one of the reasons it might vary between how much you're able to sell comes down to your negotiating bargaining power. how much are you willing are you able to get out of these contracts? Maybe there's already heavy competition in place and you can't get exactly what you thought. However, we do know you have a very strong quality product, and we believe that this is not the case that will happen. The next slide that we will go to is the base case. This is what we strongly believe is the likely outcome if you were to proceed with this project. So the initial bags being sold, if I can take your attention to the bottom line here, is increasing from 2,600 to 5,000, almost doubling. And the initial price per bag is increasing from $21 to $23. The growth rate stays the same throughout this period. However, its compounded effect by having a major increase in the first year causes the growth rate in the future, the number of bags sold in the future, to grow exponentially. When we take these into consideration, we can see we're actually profitable now with our gross profit, and it's significant gross profit. And this is a really good sign where we can see, just taking an initial first look at this, that this is a very good possibility that this project will go through before we go into even more detail. The third case that we looked at was a bull case. What if things went beyond our expectations? Here we increased the initial bags sold from 5,000 to 8,000. This is bringing us up to almost half of what you currently do with your regular business. And we also increased the unit price from $23 to $25. Here we believe, if this case were to happen, that the intermediaries that you are working with really take a liking to you, and they buy into the image that you're creating. They think that there's more value to get out of building a partnership with you, and that the opportunity to continue growing this business is great in the future. And that is the scenario that would happen for this to play out. So when we take this financial information into consideration, we did some net present value calculations. We took, in year one, doing an outflow of $100,000, which is the initial cost of making this investment in this technology and also the product line. And then we took the gross profit as the cash flow that we'd be receiving and put that out for the next 5 years. We used a discount rate of 10%, which we determined on our own, given what we thought was the risk of what your company entails, and also the type of return that you would expect in a scenario like this. So the net present value from the bear case is negative $139,000. So there is significant risk if things go at worst. However, it is not completely out of this world, and we think that you would be able to recover from a scenario where this happened. The base case, on the other hand, had a net present value of $185,000. I want that to sink in for a minute. That's almost doubling your initial investment. That's in a 5-year period. That impresses me and gets my attention. In the future, there's also that possibility that it could go towards a bull case, which could lead up to $366,000. However, that's kind of where we put the limit of our projections at this point in time. If we saw success, we might increase that even further down the road. Now Margaret is going to take a look at the internal rate of return you'd be receiving.
So just going over the performance metrics, tying in what Scott stated earlier, we see an IRR in the bear case of almost negative. This is a negative IRR. That's absolutely not mathematically possible, so it's just a loss. For the base case, the internal rate of return is a whopping 38%. And for the bull case, the internal rate of return is a whopping 54%. Now, we find the base case is the most probable to happen, so using that, we calculated a payback period of about 2.27 years, so just under 3 years. This is extremely well done, meaning that this project is not just only going to be profitable, but pay itself back in less than 3 years.
So just to bring it back to the top, like we stated before, we recommend that the company does engage in expanding into the United States. So the first item that we'd like to harken on is its feasibility. Like stated before with Margaret, with a lot of our capacity analysis, we've seen that this is possible, despite having the small to medium-sized enterprise that we do today. Now, when we go into our profitability, as Scott stated before, we do see that it's profitable as well. We see that with the best case that we do, we can further exceed a lot of the expectations that you require. And lastly, we see that risk is not is mitigated ultimately, and you don't have to worry about your son undergoing as much risk as you'd like to hope.
So the final element that we haven't touched on, you might have noticed, is the financing. And that's what we're going to come to now. Currently, we looked at your balance sheet, and you have $25,000 on your balance sheet. While we want you to keep some of this on hand, we think we can put $20,000 of this to work by putting this right into this investment. In addition, we think we can get another $20,000 as a risk-free loan from your partners, as you brought up to us. And we think that is an amount that is achievable and will help strengthen your relationship with your partners. So that leaves $60,000 for you and your son to invest in this company.
Thank you for listening to our presentation. We hope that you take this into account, and we hope that you spread your wings and soar into profitability.
Could you guys comment, since we're going to use $20,000 of cash that's sitting on the balance sheet and there's only roughly $25,000, and the account receivable represents about 50% of the assets, we're also going to charge what you recommend, $21 per unit. Do you think there's a risk in only charging $21 since the assets are you know, there's not a whole lot of liquidity in case something happens? There's not a whole lot of maneuver if you know, $21. It seems low if for whatever reason we need cash quickly.
Yes, the $21 is very low. The reason we priced it that low is because we are operating mostly on volume. So we are just sending out whatever we don't sell domestically to international markets. And in order for us to properly penetrate it, we have to ensure that our price is extremely low enough to be bought on by wholesalers. So although there is some risk involved in it, we do find that through the future that the return on this risk will be far much greater.
Okay. Could you also comment on the accounts receivable? Any suggestion that you guys might have to decrease the time frame to recoup the money?
So we believe the main reason the account receivable is so high is based on the fact that some of the consumers right now are big, not just retailers but also other like domestic users. So if we're able to go directly into a bigger retailer or like a market that is more saturated, that means that the consumers will be able to purchase it for a lower price and more directly, and we won't have as much accounts receivable in the future. So it's because of the accounts receivable being so high that we decided that a lower price will encourage people to purchase it more without having a credit or an account.
Did you also take care of you in the project industry overview in the beginning? You discussed about regulatory environment, right? And with the new election of new Trump in the USA, is another risk about that? My English is not perfect.
Could you comment on the Trump election, knowing that we're going into the US and Trump wants to be things made in America? Do you think there's risk in us going to the US?
The NAFTA might be renegotiated.
Even though, NAFTA may be renegotiated, I don't believe that that is at all a risk that is significant. It would have a very high impact if it did happen. However, I think the likelihood is lower because what it comes down to is whether consumers are being benefited. Trump is a man of the people, and he wants people to be the ones that are benefiting from his policy. By giving them products at the best prices possible, that is encouraging them to be able to have more disposable income for themselves and look out for their best interest.
Okay.
How would you prepare or counter a higher Canadian dollar if the exchange rate go up?
Because a low Canadian dollar is actually one of the primary reasons we go with this project, because it allows us to be more competitive in the American market. Now, a higher Canadian dollar, if it were to be high for a long period of time, then this project would not be as feasible because our cost of production will be too high to compete at this lower prices.
Can you prepare for that possibility?
We also think that our relationship with the intermediaries is beneficial for us as well. As we stated in our presentation, the intermediaries are people that really do dictate the price at the end level, and we are very confident in their ability to be able to find that on the side of the U.S. and help hedge our risk from that.
Thank you.
That's like the best part of the day.